Hi, everyone. It is Monday, February 19th, 2018 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Nicole Lentini, and on today's live broadcast, we're talking about coordinating stakeholders for marketing campaigns. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the hashtag HigherEdLive. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Have you ever wondered what prospective teens are thinking when they receive and read or ignore your institution's recruitment marketing? The third study in the Myth-Busting series, in partnership with NRCCUA, is the first to focus on the complete enrollment marketing mix. The research will uncover the best marketing channels and communication preferences that have the biggest influence on prospective teens' perception of your institution. Sign up now and receive early access to the research results and white paper releasing soon. Without further ado, I am very excited to welcome my guest today. Her name is Diana Kibbilts, and she's manager of undergraduate recruitment at Western University. So can you please share a bit about your background in higher education?
Yes, thanks, Nicole, for having me today. So my name, as she said, is Diana Kibbilts, but a lot of people just call me Day, so feel free to call me that. I started in digital marketing about 9 years ago, but really started in higher ed in 2011. So I got really lucky that my very first job in higher education was at Penn State University, which is an incredible institution. And I had my very first role was as online recruiting, online marketing for their World Campus, which is like their big online university, one of the best in the world. From there, I moved to the undergraduate admissions office and had various roles, starting literally as a writer for recruitment, and then ended up being the CRM manager and led the office through the CRM implementation for the second time. It was kind of a revamp that time around, which coincided with the implementation of their student system. So I have a lot of experience with both sides of marketing. So the creative, the fun, the writing, the concept, but also all the data that needs to be analyzed or looked at, and all the execution of the marketing campaigns and the way the campaigns were actually built in the CRM. From there, I went to Cornell. I spent a year in alumni affairs as a digital strategist for annual giving programs. And my role there was primarily also writing solicitations, but also creating campaigns, especially for big events like their Giving Day, 24-hour giving initiative that a lot of universities are doing nowadays. Now, in my role here at Western, I have been here for about almost 7 months, and I manage all domestic recruitment. So that's from traveling to campus tours, open house events, and of course, the entire communication strategy for recruitment, starting from the very first time they hear from us to the moment they are registered and sitting in a seat. So that's kind of my higher ed background. So mostly recruitment and admissions, but have a little bit of experience on the entire other side in alumni affairs as well.
Well, it's a good duality to have, I think. You know, we were talking before we went live about how much enrollment is changing, and I think you really, the vitality of having that marketing background is really hugely helpful in thinking about making recruitment better and really supplementing the efforts you make kind of in that travel side and everything else you do in recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I always say is, marketing, and at least where I work, marketing is recruitment. Every single thing we put out is recruitment. And I have been really lucky, at least throughout all my roles. I've always been part of like the central office, the main office. So I haven't been in an academic college or department. So all of my roles, if it's a big project, it requires coordination with multiple stakeholders across the university, whether it is academic colleges or a department or a unit, or central communications. So if I ever wanted to accomplish something big, it required a lot of coordination with a lot of partners throughout the campus.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to see, you know, kind of how much digital has really come into that forefront as well. Because I'm thinking of what you said reminded me of a quote I heard at the High Ed Web conference that was, every page of your website is an admissions page. You know, even if it's not explicitly an admissions page, it is.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
So, and fortunately, I think universities do understand that, right? I mean, when you are marketing, yes, you have several different audiences. So you're obviously trying to attract the best faculty. You're obviously trying to get alumni to stay engaged. But without that constant influx of new students, what is our business model, right? So I think universities do understand that, which is why being in recruitment, at least, I feel is a slightly privileged position, because your priorities are the university's priorities, which oftentimes helps a lot when you're trying to implement things or get budget approval for things, or if you need to make a business case for something. So I love recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I feel like you have the well, both the privilege and the burden, I think, of sometimes knowing what's coming down the pike, because you need to be getting that out there and need to be prepared for, you're always thinking about that next class and the class after that. And
Right.
yeah, so it's a lot to kind of be thinking about all the time, but it definitely makes you aware of kind of the larger institutional, like you said, goals and things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you share just quickly, because I think, you know, I mean, I live kind of a little bit in this space as well, and I know other colleagues who live in the same space that you're speaking to. So what is kind of your balance of sort of your day-to-day, month-to-month, you know, like what does that sort of admission cycle look like for you? How much of your time is kind of spent in this marketing realm? Obviously, like you said, you know, a lot of admissions is marketing, but kind of more explicitly in this space that we're talking about today.
So I'll just start by saying that one of my first cultural shocks when I first moved to Canada in August was that recruitment and admissions are very separated here, at least at my institution. So there is a team that focuses only on recruitment, and there's a team that focuses only on admissions. So my recruitment team, we spend the entire year doing recruitment activities. We do not evaluate applications. We do not talk to students about decisions. We don't do any of that. So the recruitment model here is very much focused on traveling. So there are 3 months of the year that's all the team does. Almost everybody is on the road every single day of the week. The rest of the time, I manage a team of 6, and what we focus on as a team is reporting, planning for next year, of course. You're not done with one generation, you're already trying to bring in the next. We're interacting one-on-one with students, trying to pick a program, trying to still maybe apply. We manage the open houses, all of the events, the campus tours, and of course, all of the recruitment communications. So from the moment we're on the road and we're following up to the moment, as I said before, that they are sitting in a seat. So that's kind of what the day-to-day looks like when you're not in the travel season. For me, it's a mix of all of these things. And I would say, though, that because recruitment is marketing, marketing is recruitment, that at least 70% of my time is spent thinking about content and wording and strategy and communication timing. So I think my job right now is incredibly marketing heavy, which I'm super happy about. But it just goes to show that you really can't have one without the other, at least in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I've seen that on the side of things that I'm in too, that, you know, I find more and more I need to be thinking critically about kind of the marketing of what we're doing. And it's whether it's through the email communication I'm having with students, you know, whether it's one-on-one or large scale, like I know we're going to talk about a little bit with campaigns. It is vital to kind of have that. I feel like I want to make a t-shirt now that's like recruitment is, but what did you say? Recruitment is marketing, marketing is recruitment.
Yeah, I've had to convince a lot of people of this. Before I got here, recruitment was thought of mostly as travel, and communications was kind of left to our central communication partners to map out, which is great because they are incredibly knowledgeable and experienced. But at the same time, you can't have recruitment without marketing and marketing without recruitment. So we're trying to bring those two things together now within the recruitment team. So it is everywhere. So it's everything we write on the brochure for the open house. It's every one-on-one interaction that we have with students. You know, we answer the question, but we might also plug something like, hey, and if you haven't been, come here to this super awesome event. So that's marketing, right? And it's our entire communication calendar from, this is what students are thinking about in March to the actual words that we're going to say and the time that we're going to post it, right? So that's what I spend the majority of my time doing, I would say.
Excellent. Excellent. And I know you live in some digital spaces as well, right? In some social spaces like, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, some of those others too.
Here at Western, we primarily use email and Facebook for the future students. We share our Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat accounts with the main university accounts. So we don't use them as liberally, obviously, as we use our own email and Facebook page, because the main Instagram account has all the audiences, alumni and faculty and friends and everybody, right? Current students. So we focus primarily on what we can do with our email and Facebook, and then suggest what can be pushed more broadly if it's something big enough, or an initiative that's big enough, or an event that's big enough for the entire community to be aware of.
Awesome. Wow. I feel like that topic alone could take up an entire other episode of this, because I just started thinking about, institutions that have their own admissions or recruitment channels versus ones that are sharing like you are. And we are doing the same with some of our channels, sharing with all the audiences, which is a very different conversation.
Yeah. And honestly, I was just at a conference this past week, and this is a topic I was thinking about, yeah, it's great. We focus on these channels. You should only focus on the channels you can maintain, right? Email and Facebook in our case, but the students are on Instagram and Snapchat, right? Like the prospective students that we're trying to reach. So should we have dedicated accounts or not? Then you lose the value of the big brand, right? And the beautiful images and the resources. So I don't know what the right answer is. This one's kind of been working for us so far. But I've seen more and more universities focus, kind of have a Snapchat only or Instagram only focus, because we know students don't really read emails and students don't really go on Facebook, right? So, or that's what we like to say. So it's interesting because I really don't know what the right answer is in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. Nor do I. So it's right. Yeah. We're all learning all the time. So I've presented at conferences before, and people have asked that, and I'm like, it really depends on your institution. And even still, I don't know if I know the right answer for ours. So it's a learning experience. But so let's go to these kind of broader, marketing campaigns that you're talking about. Who are the typical stakeholders that you collaboratively work with?
Yeah. Okay. So we have what we call like our yearly calendar, which is really rolling communications. And if you are in recruitment like me, these things don't really change, right? Like, the main information points, but you also have the campaigns, the exciting things you want to do sometimes. And then depending on what those things are is the level of collaboration that we have with partners across the university. So our main primary partner always is our central communications counterpart. So we are lucky that we have a person dedicated to recruitment in our central communications team. So this person has access to all of the resources, images, design, email templates, etc. So everything, and absolutely everything, is coordinated with her. Then there's partners across the university that are not necessarily academic colleges. So like residents, student center, student organizations, or anyone that wants to, that we feel like we need that special voice in our communications. If we want students or the residents folks to kind of send us some content, we work with them. And then our academic colleges, of course, which, depending on the time of the year, may or may not be too interested in sending specific messaging, but definitely as we are in the kind of conversion time frame, it's more and more important for the students to hear directly from them, right? What students think about is the program I'm going to go to, and then they think about everything else. So the more content we get from them, the better. So those, I think, are the three main pillars for me, at least in this role, is our main communications person, the supporting units around the university that make the student experience possible, and then the academic colleges that have all the, like, the actual juicy program information that students care about. Yeah. What they really care about, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's a lot of people, and that makes a lot of sense that that you have to be so cross collaborative in this kind of work. I guess I'm kind of looking at the way that higher ed currently exists, and higher ed is constantly changing and is up against a lot, a lot of policies out there, a lot of administrative challenges all the time. But especially in this space, once you start getting that many people's voices as part of these conversations, things can kind of get slowed down by, difficulties in communication, or by maybe larger than is necessary committees, or, some outdated kind of policies. So, all of these are, fairly, I think it's safe to say that a lot of our viewers have dealt with in these kinds of spaces. So, what's your take on sort of structuring your partnerships with these stakeholders in a way that keeps everyone informed and part of the decision, but doesn't delay, the actual ability to get stuff done and to get stuff out?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that it doesn't always work, and nobody has the right framework. So I'm still working on the right framework, and I will forever be working on the right framework. But I feel like what has worked for me is when especially when there is a big campaign or a new idea, is somebody has to take the lead, right? So this is why sometimes I cringe at committees, because I imagine everybody walking into a room together, completely blank slate, and trying to create something in a very collaborative environment, but there's no clear lead, right? When I have found these big campaigns work is when somebody, usually the central office, so in this case, maybe the recruitment office, has an idea. I have an idea. And you bring it to these stakeholders and say, this is where I see you fitting into this idea, and this is how we're all going to be tied together. So what I need from you is this very specific thing, this content or this voice or this piece of this entire experience that we're designing. So that's usually how I like to structure the framework, where we have to be several weeks ahead or several months ahead of when we want these things to happen with the idea. And then we pitch it to the partners and get their content or their piece, their feedback, their changes, etc. That's what I have found works the best. Even with the regular cycle type of communications, it's usually what works the best if you present a calendar to them and say, this is what I'm thinking in terms of the yearly calendar. Does this meet your needs? Is there anything here that's missing? Would you add anything? Would you say anything differently? And then you're not trying to create something from nothing where people have completely different priorities, right? Mm-hmm. Which should really all be the same priority, but it's not always. So that's the framework that I feel works. Somebody has to start first, and then everybody else kind of fills in the gaps. Now, that's kind of difficult to do if you're only doing big campaigns the entire year, like that's incredibly time and labor consuming. But fortunately, at least in recruitment, once you did it once, the next year you can do it exactly the same way again, because our audience is completely different, right? Completely new first years. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of work, but it is worth it because it can become part of your yearly cycle or your yearly calendar the next year without that much level of effort. So I don't know if that answers your question a bit. Like, that's how I get around the committee situation or the consensus situation. I'm ready first. And then it's like, here's how you can fit in to this idea.
It does answer my question. And I love that. And you're right. Like you said at the beginning, we're all trying to figure it out. So there's no one right answer, but I like your method because I do think it's vitally important that someone owns it, rather than if it's completely, everybody's got stake in this. That's when it can get sort of gritty. I guess that's not fair to say, though, because everybody still has a stake in it, whether or not it's their sort of campaign versus their part of it. But I think it gives you the space to sort of lead the charge in a way that if it's completely, these three offices are all doing this, it doesn't give you the same ability to do so.
Somebody has to go first, because it is incredibly daunting to go first. And that's what, when you try to go to a college and you say, hey, I need a communication strategy from you, they're like, oh my God, I do 10,000 other things, right? Sometimes they're even faculty, right? So giving them a very concise and clear picture of how they can contribute to this and meet their priorities that is not this incredibly labor-intensive campaign, it works. I mean, it has worked for me. They know that their priorities are being addressed. They are using their own voice, but they don't have to do the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. So this has worked. Just because, and then for me also it works because then the overarching campaign is something cohesive and collaborative that works, that makes sense for the audience, and that addresses everybody's priorities, but also has everybody's unique voice, which is what really we should be trying to do, right? So I guess my only advice is be the first, have things ready, and then ask for input and collaboration. Yeah,
it's great advice to have, and I think it shows your excitement to kind of to work with others and to say, like, I get it that you don't necessarily have the ability to hand me your communication plan and find a way to make it work, but you know, we're kind of leading the charge on this. How frequently do you sort of connect with people, meet with people? You know, how frequent is that kind of in-person communication?
So for the typical cycle of communications, the yearly cycle, at Western, we are kind of meeting happy. So we have about 4 meetings with different, some overlap of people, but not exactly the same group. So there's a brainstorming meeting, a creation meeting we have bi-weekly with my team and our communications partner. So in this meeting is where we say, okay, this is what we're thinking for April. These are the main things students care about in April. This is what we're seeing coming in through the inbox or the data. So we want to address these things in April. How do we do that? And like in that meeting, we kind of hash that all out. And then there's a meeting focused solely on social media with the recruitment partners, but also student success, student affairs type of partner, and supervisors of all of these people involved. So that's the meeting where we say, this is what we're planning to put up on social for the next month. And then there's another meeting that's about general communications that happens weekly, in which really we're just showing our supervisors what is going up or what is being sent out for the upcoming period. This is a weekly meeting, so it's pretty regular. And then that's for like our regular communication cycle. And then when we have a big campaign, which at Western I haven't actually had yet, like a big initiative, like a giving day or a big open house kind of communication strategy, we would, but when I did do it before, you meet with your stakeholders really very few times. So like there's the initial idea pitch, and then there's the final, this is what we're actually going to do meeting. But then we used to keep them updated through a toolkit, so through web resources. Just because I feel like there's so many that what they need to be doing is creating their content or whatever it is that the task is, and meeting didn't really add value in that context. But for the regular stuff, there's regular meetings. And in my opinion, there's too many meetings, but we'll get there. We'll reduce some of those with time. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, as you were talking through that, I thought of there's like ribbons for everyday things that are like floating out there on the internet, and one of them was like, I survived a meeting that could have been an email. Yeah.
Or I think I just had this exact meeting with 2 more people in it or 2 less people in it. Yeah, like sometimes I feel like I'm in exactly the same meeting I just had. But there's 1 more person or something like that. And I know we all suffer from that. I know that we all do. So I know you guys understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. If viewers aren't already shaking their heads, they will be saying like, absolutely, I live that same life. But I think it's good to be aware of it and to alleviate that the influx of meetings when you can. And I'm glad that you brought up, like toolkits or spaces that that information can be shared, that it doesn't have to be the same meeting over and over again, because otherwise things don't get done when you have a day full of meetings. You can have a lot of talk, but the actual creation of the content doesn't necessarily have a time to happen.
So one of the things that we are trying to implement here is, instead of meeting to talk about what's upcoming in the calendar, I just share the calendar. Like if you want to know what's upcoming in the calendar, just look at the calendar. And if you have questions, then we can talk, right? Then we can schedule something. So that's one way that we're definitely going to be cutting some of that. And that's another way that I keep my stakeholders engaged. So we have this communication calendar we create in the brainstorming meeting is shared with the entire campus community. So everybody knows exactly what recruitment is sending out. Everybody that wants to know what recruitment is sending out, when, and what the audience is, and what the key messages are. And when we actually build the email content, we link to it in this calendar so they can see what the email was. So that's one way, I think, to effectively keep people updated at whatever level they want to be updated. They can ask for more, or they can completely ignore it. But having a standing meeting to talk about the upcoming communications is something that I don't think is very worthwhile. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can agree with you there 100%. So it kind of makes me curious, because I know you're fairly new to Western, as you mentioned. So I'm sure you have some ideas kind of bounced around of some changes you want to make, and you've shared some of them. So when we were talking earlier about kind of the cycle, and you were saying, once you build that structure in place, you can reuse it again the next year because there's a brand new wave of students. So what's your kind of ideal breakdown of focusing on these campaigns that happen annually versus bringing in new ideas, and how would the development of those what would they look like over the course of your year?
So, if I had to pick like a percentage breakdown, I think it'd be something like 80-20 or 70-30, where 80% or 70% are the standing things that happen yearly. So when I say that, though, I mean, in a yearly calendar for recruitment, that they're in the fall, they're prospects, so you're trying to get them to apply, so you're trying to make the university look really exciting. And then in the spring, maybe they already applied, and now what you're trying to do is make sure that they accept your offer and not other offers, so you're trying to give them those incentives or make your program seem particularly interesting compared to other programs. So the main messaging kind of stays the same. It's cyclical in recruitment, but that doesn't mean that the way that you're delivering those messages or the channels that you're using to deliver those messages won't change every year, right? Mm-hmm. So when I think of the ideal structure or the ratio, I think the communication calendar, like the messaging timing, should stay pretty solid throughout the year. But we should have enough time to assess, hey, is the way that we're saying this or the way that we're delivering the right way to deliver this for this generation? And generations are changing so quickly now that, what worked this year through an Instagram story, next year, there might be no Instagram story. So we have no idea, right? So we need that flexibility as well. But to get that flexibility, you need your robust calendar, so you're not inventing what you're going to say every single month, right? So right now, because I'm new in the role, we're in the process of building that calendar. Now, there obviously was a calendar. This is not the first year Western is communicating with prospective students, but we're beefing it up a little bit, and we're adding some stuff based on student feedback and like changing some stuff around. So once we have that really solid calendar next year, what I would hope is that we could spend our time thinking about, okay, are we saying this? Is this still right? Now, that other 20% would be completely new initiatives. Like, I think we need to plan for time to be not reactive, but kind of respond to the times. So if something really cool is happening that can be used to attract students, like, you need to be able to write about it or talk about it or include it into your communications. If a new channel or a new tool or something has come out, you need the time and flexibility to be able to play with this stuff. So maybe 20% isn't enough time, but that would be my ideal kind of breakdown, where most of the stuff we know what we're doing. We're just like checking, is this still right? Is this still right? And then the rest of the time we're thinking, okay, what's missing, or what's happening, or what didn't work? What do we need to kill, right? So that kind of would be my ideal breakdown. In terms of how these things work differently, I think for anything that's the standard calendar, you need very little check-in, very little kind of committee type meetings or collaboration meetings, because everybody kind of knows what their role is, and what you actually need is just a little bit of time management. And if you need people to contribute, what you need is to, with time, request that content, make sure you get it. You need a good editing process, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's something completely new, of course, that requires like the initial pitch. It requires gathering all of the stakeholders, making sure they have a role that meets their own priorities and goals, and then a lot more effort in getting that thing off the ground, right? So that's how I see the collaboration piece a little bit different. I think there's routine collaboration, and then there's the, hey, I have to convince you that this is a good idea collaboration. And then it's not going to be a lot of work for you. So the 20% of the time, those 20% big idea projects take a lot more collaboration time than the routine does, obviously, right? I mean, I think that makes intuitive sense to all of us. But that's how next year, I hope that we can operate.
Yeah. There's so much of that I just like, I want to like highlight everything you just said, but the thing that stuck with me in particular was talking about, even if you are kind of doing these same things that you did last year, having sort of the same communication messages, thinking about the channel and how that channel changes, because I think it can be really easy to get just in the habit of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm thinking right now about, we have our admitted Facebook group, and we're seeing that some students are reaching out to us and saying, I don't have a Facebook page. Like, how can I connect with the other classmates from my class when I don't want to make a Facebook profile? What are my other options? And that's been something that's been with us for a long time. So I wanted to kind of go back and sort of reiterate what you said there, because I think it's so vitally important to be thinking about this, even if we are, trying to focus on that breakdown of same campaigns we've done in the past versus brand new ideas. And I love your concept on that too. It's so vitally important to make sure that we're paying attention to doing these things right, and paying attention to our audiences and meeting our audiences where they are.
Yeah. And I'll confess, hopefully, like, my boss is not listening right now, that, Western had been doing the exact same communication calendar for 12 years before this year. And the messages were right. They were at the right time, but it was literally, well, what was the newsletter last year? Let's update some of the numbers, and then let's send it out again. And that works. It certainly works, because, again, it's cyclical. It's a cyclical business. But, maybe that's not the voice that you want to use anymore, or maybe that's not something they're worried about anymore. And that assessment has to happen every time, right? So even if it is a fixed calendar, like, every month you should be thinking about the next month and saying, does this still matter in March? Does this still, or in the fall or in the summer, look at your entire fall calendar. Does this still matter in November? Does it still matter in October? Just to be sure that you're doing it right. And that the channel is right. So we also have the Facebook thing. And I said it earlier, like, is Facebook, like, right now it's okay. It's kind of working. It's working. But is it going to be working, right? Like, we know parents are the people that are on Facebook. Do we have a parent strategy for Facebook? Not really. So these are the things that we should be giving ourselves space to think about, which means we need about 24 more hours in a day, right?
Isn't that the truth? It's ridiculous. Yeah. There's never enough time in the day. Well, even when you were talking earlier about your role and all the work that you do, it's like, and I laughed because I'm like, I do a lot of the same, but oh my gosh, it sounds like so much.
It's, thankfully, in a way, our curse that higher ed doesn't move at a very fast pace is actually beneficial for us, because we would not be able to do everything that we want to do with the time that we have, right? So, yeah.
Double-edged sword, I suppose.
That's right.
Yeah. So I know you've been part of some really cool campaigns in the past. So I'd love to hear kind of what was maybe one or two of the most successful campaigns, successful marketing campaigns you developed in your past, and what made them so successful, and kind of what did the collaborative side of things look like in the build up to those campaigns?
Yeah. So I'll talk about Cornell. So I loved my time at Cornell. It was a magical year. I was really fortunate to work on with really amazing teams and a really cool campaigns. So one of the ones I'm most proud of is our Giving Day last year, Giving Day campaign, email communications in particular. So, we had a real problem. In the previous year, our unsubscribe rates were through the roof, because it's a giving day, right? It's 24 hours. Everybody wants to communicate with their constituents, whether it's past donors or alumni, and everybody has a right to, right? Like we all should ask for the gift that we want. However, it is a finite audience of alumni and past donors. So a lot of them felt like they were getting spammed, and there was no real, it wasn't just the volume of emails, but there was no real content strategy behind the emails. So if you looked at what a typical alumnus or alumna received, you know, it was very similar subject lines kind of clustered together in the morning, then nothing, and then again in the afternoon. And like, you can tell if something was written by engineering versus central versus football, right? It was just like, I looked at that and I said, we can do better. I know we can. So that was probably one of the campaigns I'm most proud of is, you know, the primary thing was we have to control volume and we have to control purpose. So for volume, we talked about ways to minimize the spamming. So it's giving day. So there's gonna be at least some tiny level of spam. Like everybody just has to be okay with that, right? But maybe instead of 15 emails in a day, it can be 6 or 5, right? So that's one thing we addressed by defining who would get what and at what point we would not allow individual units or colleges to email people. But then the other piece, the content piece, it was just as important, right? So Central, of course, Central was communicating with the entire constituent, like the entire audience that day. But what is our role as Central? So it's to announce and to create excitement and to like kind of explain the momentum and the power of everybody together. And I can't tell the engineering story like engineering can, or an engineering can't tell the art story like arts can, and I can't tell the art story. So in that campaign, again, I was first, right? You have to pitch this first and you have to say, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'll do as Central, but this is how you can complement this and make it beautiful, right? So tell the stories, motivate, inspire, show what happens when people make gifts. So what ended up happening that year is, you know, although, of course, there was still a lot of emails, it was less, but the emails that they got were relevant. And I do believe, you know, there's a lot of research about this, but if the emails are relevant, people are less likely to be offended by getting a lot of them, right? So if you see an email that's very clearly about how I'm making a gift to this engineering project is going to help the environment, you're like, oh, that's really cool. Instead of engineering saying, hey, today's giving day, make a gift, right? So that was one of the campaigns I was definitely very proud to collaborate on. And it required creating a purpose for each and every single one of the stakeholders, and then making sure that I had created enough of a framework and a structure and a process for them to fit into it without it being super labor intensive for them. So all they had to do was create content. And so our campaigns were really well coordinated throughout the day. So that one really worked really well. And it was, you know, the first meeting with the stakeholders was with a core stakeholder group kind of pitching the idea. The second meeting was with gather feedback, make changes to the strategy. Then every stakeholder was rolled out to all the stakeholders as this is what we're going to do. And then we didn't have any more meetings after that. All we had was a toolkit where we kind of kept people updated. And we hosted some virtual office hours. They could also be in-person office hours. We just kind of sat in a meeting room, had like remote access on. And if anybody had any questions, they could ask us during office hours or not, right? So that's how we kind of kept people up to date and communicating with each other. But it worked beautifully. It worked really well. In terms of metrics, so I think for me, I focus just as much on my internal audiences as I focus on my external audiences when I'm measuring if something is successful or not. Of course, unsubscribe rates were lower. Of course, conversion in some of these segments was higher. So we got more gifts from people as we had last year. But the fact that we established a precedent for collaboration so that the following years or with any other campaign, you could just mimic that same model. That's a huge win for people in roles like you or yours or mine, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to convince them that collaborating is a good idea. Again, in the future, they know they can trust you. They know that you have their priorities as one of your priorities as well. So the fact that, you know, you're building relationships and people are really happy with the way that you prioritize them and everybody's needs were addressed, that's a huge win that we can't measure in clicks or opens or anything like that. So that's why I consider that one really successful. I think there was a lot of relationship building and a lot of trust that happened out of that campaign. And we did a similar smaller campaign later in the year that kind of followed the same model where, you know, we have to get people to give last minute in the year, the fiscal year, right? So how do we do that? So I came up with an idea, and same thing. So I had the framework of the idea, but I needed the colleges and units to kind of provide their own part, their own piece. And all I had to do was go out to them and say, hey guys, this is the framework. Do you want to participate? If so, this is what I need you to do. 1, 2, 3. And they trust me now, right? So it was, again, another really great experience. So those are two, both at Cornell, that I'm really happy about. And it's a model that I have, you know, consistently tried to use since then. So it's the be first, care about their priorities, and give them a purpose that is different from your purpose that meets their needs, right? So usually that has worked for me. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I love hearing those stories because it's cool to see, you know, you didn't want to diminish the power of any of those different groups on campus. You just came forward with a way to achieve everybody's goals, you know, in a better way, while also thinking of your audience. And I think that is just a great kind of start to finish story to be able to take a look at. I appreciate you getting a little bit into the kind of project management side of things too, because I think it's really interesting to be trying to think about, you know, how do we make sure everybody feels heard and feels valuable as part of this conversation, especially when you're kind of leading the charge a little bit and helping to guide them. And goodwill does go a long, long way. I mean, metrics are helpful, and I think certain board members always like to see those. But I think having those relationships and knowing you can tap into those relationships in the future is huge. And I'd imagine that even after you left, that goodwill still stays, you know, within that office back at Cornell. And now you have a good sense of how to forge that there at Western too.
Exactly. And you know, that's exactly, I hope, the way it's working this year when they are trying to do collaborative campaigns, that the trust is still there and that the same framework is being followed. It's, you know, it's funny because sometimes previously when I hadn't cracked this, right, it always felt like it an us versus them type of thing. Like Central just wanted to override and didn't understand the priorities of the units or the faculties or the departments. It is just as easy as asking, does this idea meet your needs? And if not, how would it? Because oftentimes the tweaks are not that intense or that, you know, that life-changing. And then they're like, great, I have to do less work because somebody else is coordinating this for me. And it actually meets my needs. So, and for us, it's a huge win because our audience, like the messaging is making sense, right? So it's scary to ask that because you have a fear that your entire strategy is going to change, but it often does not. It's often a very small tweak to get to a place where they're actually comfortable with a collaborative strategy. And you know, I've talked for hours on how to get people to agree on one proposal, but it starts with, you have to understand that they are worried about their turf, and that's understandable. So how do you make sure that that is covered? It's really, really that simple. And it's just by asking the question. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I like what you said. It goes a long way that, most people, when you tell them, like, actually what I'm suggesting to you can make your life easier and you don't have to keep, reinventing the wheel every time, it goes a long way and makes people more excited to collaborate and to understand. And I think some people are still maybe a little bit harder to convince, but when you have the proof that you can put forward, I think that really goes a long way. Mm-hmm. So I know we're nearing the end of the hour, so keeping an eye on tweets. Any viewers who have any questions for Day, please feel free to tweet us with the hashtag HigherEdLive. She's active on Twitter as well, so if you missed her now, you might be able to catch her after the fact. But we talked a little bit about this, but I just want to kind of loop back because I want to be sort of forward thinking with the last few questions. So we talked about, you've had this great success at Cornell in the past and other institutions in the past. And now, since you're fairly new with your role at Western, what are kind of the changes you're hoping to implement as far as the structure of how these campaigns and how the collaborative communication happens in the future? What are some changes that you're hoping to make within the short distance future?
Yeah. So when I started the role, as I said previously, I managed a team of 6, and within this team, they're very young. There's a lot of very creative talent and incredibly enthusiastic and like proactive talent. So the very first thing that I'm doing and that I've established a structure to do is to let them be the voice of recruitment at Western. They're also the same people that travel all throughout the province. So they're the same people in direct contact with our actual audience throughout 3 months of the year. So, and they have like excellent backgrounds in order to be able to articulate and create content and create communication strategies. So like that's one of the most important steps, I think. If you have a team, if you manage a team, or if you have work study students or interns, find a way to let them be the voice. You are the conduit. They are the voice. Of course, it requires your supervision and your guidance. But an entire communication strategy cannot just be born out of one brain. It just cannot.
No.
So it really cannot. It's not great. So that's one of the biggest changes. I mean, in the past, it had been also done collaboratively, but there wasn't a lot of input from the people that were on the ground, the actual recruiters, which are the people that understand the audience, and the ones that are in charge of the recruitment verbally, right, when they're out. So that's the voice that students hear first, and then that's not the voice students hear again, right? So there has to be a match there. So that's one of the biggest changes. And it's now for me, I've established the structure, but now my job is to establish the trust, right? And continue empowering them and getting all of my stakeholders and my management and everybody involved to trust them just as I trust them. So that's one big structural piece. Highly recommend. Second is obviously get rid of meetings that are not necessary. I think that's anyone in any role in any situation can benefit from that. And part of it comes from the trust of where this stuff is coming from. So if you trust the source, you don't need meetings to approve or review or make sure things are going out correctly. So that's one big kind of structural change that I'm hoping we can make. Now I'll talk about a structural change I did that was successful at Cornell, just because I remembered it just now.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a writer, or you ever have to write, and there's an approval process that involves maybe your supervisor or somebody else, like you can cry about how incredibly horrible it can be sometimes. Like there's version 15 in an email in a Word doc, and you're like, why are you still changing words? Like the message is loud and clear. Like there's this back and forth. If you are a writer, I highly recommend, and this is against research and practices, to, if possible, schedule a 30-minute session with whoever your approver is and have them see the thing there. Maybe give it to them in advance if they really want it. And any changes that need to be made will happen in that room and then never again. So you have translated your back and forth 15 version, 3-day, 5-week, 2-week process to 30 minutes. And you both agree that at the end of those 30 minutes, that's the final version of the draft. That was, or of the email or whatever. That was monumental. It was such a successful thing to do for us. It cut so much time away from review and like frustration, right? That everything goes back and forth. Like, how am I missing the mark? Why am I not getting this? And from the approver's perspective as well, like, why isn't this right? You can have those conversations in person and like solve it like that. So that's another structural tip. We haven't encountered the situation necessarily here, but if I ever do, that's what I'll do about it. 30-minute review meetings, final draft at the end, period. So if you're a writer, that's a pro tip.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. I love that. It worked really good for us.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I mean, I'm even thinking about my own experiences with writing, and we've had that back and forth Google Docs, adding comments, and I think the other thing that you gain from that is, yeah, you can hash it out in person, and when you need to go back, when it's the same people again for something in the future, you're also hopefully going to retain some of the things that you figured out then to be keeping in mind for the next time around, so it can make it even quicker and even a more simplified process.
It's easy to think that meeting is useless, right? Like, oh, one more meeting. Why can't I just read it and send you my feedback? It is not. Not all meetings are a waste of time, right? Meetings get a bad rep. Bad meetings are bad, but not all meetings are bad. So that was a huge shift for how we handle approval process. And I'm sure a lot of us in recruitment admissions end up writing our own stuff, and it has to get reviewed and approved. So that's something that has really worked for me in the past.
That is fantastic advice. I might have to take that back to our own experiences here, because I think that is a really great way to hash all that out. And actually, that leads really beautifully into just kind of my closing question for you. Is just what sort of, I mean, you've shared some great advice, some great tips, some great experiences. And I know, like you said, we're always learning, and there's no particular way that's necessarily the right way. But is there any other advice that you are hoping that you're willing to give to our viewers or listeners about kind of being in this space?
Well, so, I'll just reiterate what I've kind of been saying throughout. Yeah. And I'll start by saying that, I have changed as I have grown. So my approach now is very different to my approach 10 years ago when I was in my 20s, right? And what I have learned is that even if I have a phenomenal idea, it can't come alive without the brains of many other people. It just cannot, right? So what I need to make sure that I do is that I give people the same passion that I'm feeling for this idea or this proposal, and that I give them a spot that is uniquely theirs. It is my job as the person that is in recruitment, or, the digital strategist for whatever. It is my job to make sure I showcase the best of the best and the best of what people can give me, right? And I have to create the framework, and I have to make sure their priorities are addressed, but then I need to let them shine. So if you can find a way, especially when you're doing big initiatives or big campaigns, to create the framework where that's going to be a cohesive message and the audience is going to like it, but then give every person or every stakeholder that's involved the opportunity to give a unique perspective and have their priorities addressed, then you'll rarely ever get a no, right? You'll rarely ever get somebody that doesn't want to cooperate. So, I have been fortunate because my roles have been in central communications. Like, I've always been in like the main office, the main campus, the primary recruitment office, whatever you want to call it. So it is very easy for me in this position to say, oh, of course, I lay the framework and then I just get the pieces. If you are in a department, that's a little bit harder to do with the rest of the university. But, think about your job as connecting the dots if you are in one of these central roles. You kind of lay out the picture, you have an idea what the picture is, but you can't draw it on your own. So you have to get the colors from everybody else, and it is your job to connect the dots. So if you go through your professional life that way, people will begin to trust you, and they will begin to understand that you don't want to take over their messaging. You don't want to make it all the same voice necessarily. You want to showcase the best of what they've got. And all you're trying to do is create the framework where it all makes sense together. So that's very abstract advice. But it's what now, with 9 years of experience in this digital realm, it's what I have learned that really almost always works. So
fantastic. That was a perfect way to end it. And I think it was a beautiful way to put it too. To really think, I love that, bringing their colors to it, and thinking of it almost in an artistic way is actually a really cool metaphor for sort of pulling this all together. Yeah. So thank you so much, and thank you for just being part of the show today. I learned a lot, and I hope our viewers did as well.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure. And if anybody has questions, I'll be checking out Twitter.
So awesome. I will make sure to share your Twitter handle so that folks know where to find you. And of course, if anybody uses the hashtag HireEdLive, I will share those questions with Day as well. So thank you again, Day. And thank you, as always, to our program sponsors, mStoner and NRCCUA. And I will see you all again next month. Have a great day.